This is Gemara in Kiddushin, Daf Yomi Gimel of the learning. For this month of Elul has been generously sponsored as an incredible schos aliyas neshama. Every word of Torah elevating the neshama higher and higher of Esel Rezel Basra Meir. B'siyata d'Shemaya. Every word of Torah, the Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, should continuously elevate as the Rezel Basra Meir closer and closer to the Kisei HaKavod. We're holding on, you Gimel Amud Aleph. We are 4 lines down. And we just finished a Raya of Rava. And the basic Raya of Rava focused on the shtika. Focused on what is the status of a shtika. Is the shtika of a woman means she wants to accept the Kiddushin. And we brought a Raya from the case in which the husband gives her a mat. Afterwards says that the money inside should be her Kiddushin. And she was quiet. Whether that shtika is valid or not. As the Gemara concluded 3-4 lines from the top of your Gimel Amud Aleph, the Gemara said, Olav ratza damra'in, loy ratza de'ishtika mishtika, ushma minas. What was the raya that we concluded with? Shtika del'achar matan ma'ois, v'loy klum hu. That being quiet after the money is given, it's true. Silence when the money is given will be a different story. But the raya is shtika del'achar matan ma'ois. Says the Gemara, Loi klumhu. Asks the Gemara on this raya of Rava, again 5 lines down, you Gimel Amud Aleph. Kashi ba b'foma nahara mishmei Rav Huna berei Rav Yeshua. The town of Nahara, they raised the following question. The name of Rav Huna berei Rav Yeshua. Mi dami. The classical kasha. Are the 2 cases really comparable? Hasam b'teiras pikad. In the case of the brisa, the money was given as a pikadain to watch the money, and only later when he says that money, the money you accepted as a pikadain should be a Kiddushin, and then she is quiet. That's when we say the shtika is not a Kiddushin. She accepted it as a pikadon. Her silence now is inconsequential. Why? Savra, because she thinks, also B'teres pikadon yavina nihala was given originally as a pikadon. So Savra, she thinks right now, Isha dina luhu mitvera. If I drop the coins and then they're broken, I'm going to be obligated because she originally accepted these coins as a pikadon. She's nervous to do anything with the coins. So her silence is not an acceptance, says the Gemara, but rather her silence is because she doesn't want to be obligated in the coins. Whereas Hacha, in the case where he gives her a mat and later says the money inside should be a Kiddushin. B'teiras Kiddushin yavina nihala. The mat was given as a Kiddushin. The problem was that the mat might not be of value. So on that, he said the money's inside. So therefore, what should she have done if she doesn't want to accept the Kiddushin? So if she's not happy with it, lishtinu, she should throw it down. And the fact that she didn't should, yes, be an agreement for Kiddushin. That is the kasha on the raya of Rava. Says Rav Achai, Parach Rav Achai, no kasha. Atu kuli nashi, dina gemiri. Do all women know all the halachais that they know if they drop the money that they originally accepted as a pikada and they might be obligated? Hachanami, it's not true. So why did she not drop the cash in the case of Pigadon Savar? She thinks Shadina Leho Mitra Mechayvina B'achri Aisa. So too, she thinks the same thing. She thinks she's going to be a Mechayev, and therefore there is a good equation. The Rava's Raya was a good Raya. Meaning, in the second case, let's explain this properly. In the case of the mat, asks Rav Achai, does every woman know that she's not obligated for the money? No. She might think, 1 second, someone handed me something. If I drop it and it breaks, I'm obligated. So maybe the reason she didn't drop it is not because she wants to accept it, but rather because she's nervous of it breaking, just like in the first case. Therefore, we do have a raya. Says the Gemara, Shalcha Rav Acha bar Rav lekamei Ravina. Rav Acha bar Rav sent to Ravina kaigav namai. What is the halacha in such a case? Do we say in the aforementioned cases that we assume that the woman is acquiescing and accepting the Kiddushin or not? Shalach lehi responded, Anan lo yishmi'alon, I didn't hear anything. Hadar Avuna b'rei Rav Yeshua. I did not hear anything of Ravuna b'rei Yeshua. Aton bayu dishmiya l'chul chashala. You heard of this problem. You heard of the Ravuna b'rei Rav Yeshua, and therefore you should be chayshesh that there was an actual Kiddushin. And now we segue in to a bit of a related case. This will harken us back to the daf from yesterday. Hayid, so there was a woman, Davika Mizneva Varshechi. She was selling Varshechi, which are some sort of silk items, silk ribbons, silk strands. Asahu Gavra, a guy comes, Chataf Varshecha Mina, and he grabs, she's sitting there selling her silk ribbons or silk, whatever it is. A guy comes and grabs one. Amralei, so she says, what are you doing? Havani Ali, give it back. Amar La, the man says, I'avina l'chaf, I give it to you. Mikudeshes li, will you be married to me? Shakalte, she takes it. Ushtika, and she is quiet. So very similar case to that which we had yesterday, to the silence that we began discussing today. It's her item. He grabbed it. She asked for it back. He says, if I give it to you, it should be a Kiddushin. She says nothing. She grabs it and is silent. What is the halacha? Says the Gemara of Rav Nachman, she is able to say, or about 20 lines down, first word line is in. She could say, in shakli, vididi shakli. I took it, and it's mine, and therefore I never had a hava mina to become mikudeshes via taking it back, because it's my item. You grabbed my item, so me taking my item back, she could claim that she never wanted to be mikudeshes. On such halacha, you say, Rava Rav Nachman. Rava asks, what is the halacha? Says the Braisa, if a man marries a woman with something that was stolen, something that was extorted, or says the Braisa, if he grabs a seller from her hand, he marries her with her own money. Sounds very familiar. What's the halacha? Says the Braisa, mikudeshes. They're married. So why in our case, asks the Gemara, are we saying that if she takes it back, she's not necessarily accepting Kiddushin, she's taking back her own item? We see clearly he is able to marry her with her own money. Answers the Gemara, no, right? Hasam, in that case, the reason there is Kiddushin is b'deshadich. It's because there was a prior shidduchim, there was a prior agreement to get married. Asks the Gemara, where do we know of such a differentiation that if there was a prior shidduch, then the halacha will be different? Titania, we learned in a Braisa, Amar La. If a man says to woman, Kinsi Sela Zu Shani Chayiv, take this seller that I'm obligated, Lechi. If he says to her, take this seller that I am obligated to give you, she takes it, and then he says to her, Skachili, boy, marry me with it, with that seller that I just gave you, that I told you was yours. What's the halacha? Bishas matan mois. If at the time of giving it, Ratzah, she acquiesces, Mikudeshes, she is married. Loi Ratzah, she does not agree, no Mikudeshes. La'achar matan mois. If he says this after the money was already given, afilu Ratzah, no Mikudeshes. So says the Gemara, my Ratzah, my Le Ratzah, what does it mean? She agrees or not? Ilema Ratzah damra in. Loi Ratzah damra loi, this should sound familiar. This was the raya of Rav that we finished off with yesterday and we began with today. If you're going to tell me that, what does Ratzah mean? Ratzah means she says yes. Loi Ratzah means she says no. The Amra loi, excuse me. Ha ishtika, but what would the implication be if she was quiet? Have Kiddushin. So then, v'nisti mikudeshes tam. So then the Braisa should have just said, The Brisa should have said in the case where she agrees that she is a mikudeshet without saying anything more. Ki hasam, just like it did in the previous Brisa. And then we'll know that if she said no, of course they're not mikudeshes. But the Brisa doesn't do that. El Rata Damrayin, so we have to say that Rata means she says yes. Loi Rata, the Ishtika that she was quiet, Vikatani, Dena Mikudeshes, and it says they're not married. My Taima, what's the reason if she's quiet, they're not married? Because she could say in Shakli, Vididi Shakli, I took what is mine. Continues Rav Nachman Velakashach. Like we said a moment ago, the Kitchabi Gazel B'chamis B'Gneva Shechatav Selam Miyada. It's shver from the Brisa that says he can marry her with her own item Miyada, or it's like he grabs from her V'Kitcha Mikudeshes. Elalav Shema Mina. So this Brisa as well in the last narrow line, the only way to potentially explain this Brisa is, we're going to have to say Hadish Hadich, Hadilai Shadich. We're going to have to differentiate whether there was prior Shidduchim, and that is our raya that we see that in the case of Shidduchim, it's easier to assume that the money was taken as a Kiddushin. After bringing such a raya, says the Gemara, Kinoch Nafshed Ravashi, Asi. As Ravasi is being nifter on the first medium-sized line, either Rabbanan continue l'shemaitze. So the Rabbanan came to gather together his teachings. Of course, this reminds us of the element of Torah Sheba'al Peh. That, of course, nothing was written down, and rather, everything was orally transmitted. So after Avasi is nifter, the Talmidim come, they want to gather together all the teachings of the Rabbah and make sure that they're all remembered. Amar Lohu, Ahomei Rabbanan. There was one Rav there, Rav Yaakov Shemei, his name was Rav Yaakov. Hachi, Amar Ravasi. And he said, this is what Ravasi says. Abar Rav Mani, Kishem Sheni Janek, Nes Bebachs Mishave Pruta. Kach Ein Karka Neknes Bebachs Mishave Pruta. So this Rav Yaakov says, the name Ravasi, the same way you can't marry a woman, Pachs Mishave Pruta, can't purchase a piece of land, Pachs Mishave Pruta. Amru Lei, the other Rabbanan that were there says, V'atanya. But what about the Brisa? The teacher is Aval B'Sheni Shenikis B'Chashava Pruta. Says explicitly, no woman is not married unless it's Shava Pruta. But Karaka is indeed Niknes B'Chashava Pruta. So you're telling me that Ravasi equated the two, but the Brisa says otherwise. So Amar Lei. So Rav Yaakov responds, Ki Tanyahi, when did that Brisa say you could be kaina, you could acquire land with B'Chashava Pruta? Is bechalipin, is only via an exchange. The Tanya we learned in a Brisa, koinim bekli, that when you use chalipin, you could acquire items with a kli avisha in by shaveh pruta. So halacha number one that Rav Yaakov says b'shmei in the name of Ravasi. We'll see, of course, how this is going to circle back around to our discussion. That what you could be kaina. He held that the same way a woman is not acquired b'chashav pruta, so too karka. The price that says the karka is kaina b'chashav pruta, that means only bechalipin. And we continue. Hadar Yasvi, so Rabbanan by Ravasi were sitting v'kamri. They were saying another halacha. 2 lines from the wide lines at the bottom of Yigimel Amud Aleph. Hada Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. That which Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel says, Kol she'eino yodea b'tiv gittin u'kedushin. Anyone that does not know the nature of Gittin Kiddushin, lo yehi lo yesek iman, should not get involved. If one does not know the intricate halachas and Even Ezer of Gittin Kiddushin, it's not your place. So Amar Rav Asi, Amar Rav Yechanan, v'kashin lo'ilam, yoiser midar hamabul. These people, those that create, that get involved in Gittin Kiddushin, even though they don't know what's going on, is worse than the Dar HaMabul. Why? Shenemar, in the first wide line, the Badar HaMabul, it says, Eile v'chichesh urtzoyach v'ganoi v'noif paratu. And they're falsely killing, stealing, adultery. They've broken through all boundaries. V'damim nagu. And what happens? And blood have met. Yet, we see, with regard to, this is with regard to the Dar HaMabul. My mashma. So now the Gemara says, okay, very good. But how do we see that one who dons Gittin and Kiddushin is even worse than this terrible list that says by Dara Mabul? Kidim Targum Rav Yosef, as Rav Yosef was Metargim, Moldin Benin Minashei Chavreim. Rav Yosef explains they have children from their friends' wives. Chayvin al Chayvin Moisifin, they add on Aveira to Aveira. Uchsev al Kain to Aval Haaretz Molel Kol Yoshev. But as the pasuk says, on the count of this Aveira, the land is destroyed, and anyone who lives in it is going to be lost from the land. Kol Yoshev Ba B'chayas Hasadeh Ba'oif Hashamayim, with the beasts of the field and the birds in the sky, V'gam Digei Hayam Yasfu V'goymer, and also the fish will be destroyed. V'ilu V'dar HaMabul, what does it say about the Dar HaMabul? Loi Nigzor Gzeira Al Dagim Shabiyam. So when it comes to these Dinei Torah that are messing up marriages, we see that it destroys even the fish in the sea. And yet, explains the Gemara, when it comes to the Mabul, there's no Gzeira on the fish. And Emar, as the Pasuk says, 2 lines from the bottom, Mikol Asher B'charava Mesu, whoever's on the dry land die, V'lo Dagim Shabiyam, and not the fish at sea. V'ilu Hacha, and similarly concludes the Gemara by Hosea, the Psukim say, If Ilu Dagim Shabiyam, if Ilu Dagim Shabiyam. So that's how the Gemara proves that these Dayanim judging Gittin and Kiddushin without knowing what's going on are even worse. Ve'ema ad avokulu. Asks the Gemara 1 second, maybe the destruction that the Psukim are talking about is until all the Aveiros are done, not just the production of Mamzerin, meaning not only if we have these judges judging incorrectly, but maybe you have to do that whole list of Aveiros. Explains the Gemara in the last line, Lo Salgadayitach. Why? The Pasuk says, Kim the Eile Avla Haaretz. Because of these, the land is destroyed. So we see any one of the Aveiros is enough to destroy the land. Similarly, the Dayanim, they're getting involved in Gittin and Kiddushin, where they don't know what's going on. Ask the Gemara, Ve'ema elo lechot. So then why say that this alone, Eila, regarding to the Shvuah Shav, this swearing falsely, that itself destroyed the Beis HaMikdash. V'hanach lechudayun, and say that the other Aveiros alone could destroy it. But how do you see that the Dayanim judging incorrectly are enough to destroy the Beis HaMikdash and have all these Aveiros? And we turn over to Yigimel Amid Beis and says the Gemara, Miksev uparatzu, paratzu ksev, there's no extra vav. And since there's no extra vav, says the Gemara, we see that all the Aveiros are connected. And with that, we continue on to Yud Gimel Amid Beis with another din of Rav Asi. Again, this was a bit of a sidebar. We'll see in a moment why we got involved in this discussion. But at the moment, we're middle of the Rabbanan there after Rav Asi was nifter, telling over all the halachas of the Rebbe. So Hadar Yasvi v'Ka'amri, on the top line of Yigimel Beis, they were sitting and teaching Hadar Tanan, that which we learned in a Mishnah. Ha'isha sheviya chatas, a woman that brings the carbon chatas, and then is nifter. And she is nifteres, v'yu yarshin oilasa. Her yarshin bring the carbon as an oila, meaning no one eats it. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, v'ushef rishasa mechayim. And this is only when the woman designated the animal while she was alive. If she did not separate it, then the Yarshim do not bring her karbanos afterwards. Says the Gemara, what do we see from this halacha? Alma kasavar, we see from over here, shibuda lav daraisa, that the shibud, that which is incumbent upon someone to do, is not a din daraisa, because if it was a din daraisa, they would have to bring the carbon, even if she didn't separate it prior. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Asi, Amar Rav Yochanan. So says Rav Asi, and the name of Rav Yochanan, Avagav Shal Afrisha Mechayim. No, Rav Asi disagreed. Said even if the animal was not separated while the person was alive, they still have to bring it after the death. Why? Says the Gemara, Rav Asi is clearly of the opinion Amar Ksavar Shibuda Huda Raisa. And now the Gemara comments, V'apolik ba chadazimna. This was a old machlekes that we've had already, whether Shibuda Daraisa or not. The Rav Shmuel, Damri Tarvayu, Rav and Shmuel taught together, Milva al peh, you lend something without a shtar, Eina Gaivim in a yarshin, you don't collect for the yarshin, V'loim and alakuchais, nor from purchasers. Whereas Rav Yochanan Reish Lakish Damri Tarvayu, Reish Lakish and Reish Lakish disagree, and they say Milva al Damri Tarvayu. They both say Milva al peh is indeed Goive min yarshin bein min Goive bein min yarshin bein min alakuchais. So we see that that's a machlokes whether she would do the daraisa. If she would do the daraisa, then even a milva al peh, the halacha is going to be that it's going to be collected from yarshin, from the kuchais, which is what Rav Yochanan Reish Lakish is saying. If it's not a daraisa, then it will not, which is what Rav and Shmuel are saying. So seemingly these machlokes, Rav and Shmuel, Rav Yochanan Reish Lakish, is the same machlokes that we just quoted Rav Asi versus Shmuel. Says the Gemara, Sricha, we have to say the machlokes 2 times. Because if we only said in this last case, I would have thought, Shmuel, why? Because it's not a halva, it's not a loan that's written in the Torah. But in the other case of the carbon, what was the case of the carbon of a woman bringing a carbon? It was a woman who gives birth. Why? Because that's a carbon that wasn't invented by the Bailim. That's a carbon, that's a chiyuv daraisa when Yoledes says to bring. So maybe they're asking that the Yarsh will have to bring it. In the case of Yoledes, the Yoledes, yes, the Mova Ksuva B'Tayra, Ksuva B'Shtar Damya. That's the reason why Rav Yochanan says that you would have to bring it even after the woman is niftares. But in a regular case, Shmuel, Sricha, and that's indeed the reason why we have to list this case twice, even though it's seemingly very similar, but it's not identical, and we would not be able to learn one from the other. Says the Gemara, so what's the halacha? Amar Papa Hilchasa Milva al peh Goivim in our yarshin, but v'ina goivim in al kuchais. Goivim in our yarshin, why? Because she buda daraisa. Or saying goivim in our kuchais, the less leikalos. Even though one would think that the gavia, the collection from the yarshin, the collection from the kuchais, seemingly go hand in hand. Says the Gemara, no. To collect from Yarshim, yes. Why? Because there is indeed a Shiba D'Oraisa. There is indeed an obligation Mid'Oraisa to play, and therefore the Yarshim are going to have to pay up the milva, even though it was not done with a shtar. Whereas when it comes from taking from the Lekuchais, that would not have to be done. Why? Kivan to Leslie call, therefore there would be no way for the person to protect himself, as there was no call, there was no public knowledge as to that which happened. We continue, we're about 30 lines, 25 lines to the bottom. Sinak in middle of Yekilom Beis, the 2 dots. Ve'koina es atzma beget ubemisabal. 12 a blot later, we roll all the way back to Daf Beis. That how does a woman leave a marriage? How does she acquire es atzma? Beget umisabal, she gets divorced, her husband dies. Says the Gemara. Bishlama get, I understand. That's the precedent that you leave a marriage through a get, as the pasuk says. You write a document of severance. And how do we know that the death of the husband causes her to be mutter to the world? Answers the Gemara. Svaru, it's a svara. Hu asra, vu sharta. The husband is that which made her usher, so he's the one that's going to permit her to the world. Ask the Gemara 1 second. What about arayis? Any cases of arayis? The husband causes the relatives to become forbidden to his wife. The husband's brother can marry his wife, and yet when he dies, the arayis do not become mutter to marry the woman. The brother was a bad example. Of course, that would be yibum. Let's say his son. A man who marries a woman, his son is not allowed to marry that woman, and even after he dies, his son is not allowed to marry the woman. What happened to the svara of who arsra, who sharta? Ella explains the Gemara Medamar Rachmana for the fact that the Torah says Yevama shein labanim asura. A Yavama that her husband dies not need children. She is forbidden into the world. She needs to do Yibam. From there we extrapolate to every other case with children. Hayesh Labanim Mutares after the husband dies. Says the Gemara, what's the raya? V'dilma'in Labanim, maybe if there are no children. Asur La'alma, she's also to the world. V'shari Liyavam, she's mutter Liyavam. But maybe the Yesh Labanim in a case where a husband dies and the woman has children, Lekuli Almanami Asira. How do you know that she's mutter to the world? This explains the Gemara, Ella Midamer Achmana. You know what the source is? So the fact that the Torah teaches. Almana Lekain Gadol Asura. And Almana, a woman whose husband died, is forbidden to Kain Gadol. The clear implication from that forbiddance is that the Almana couldn't marry a Kohen Hediyot. So what do we see? We see the Almana clearly is mutter to get remarried. Says the Gemara, still, what's your eye of Dam Kohen Gadol belav? Maybe she can't marry Kohen Gadol to Nisa Darais of Alav, the Kuli Alma Basei, but maybe to the rest of the world she can't marry is a positive injunction. Hi Asay, Maya Vidate. Says the Gemara, how could that be? What would be the Asay? Id Ahaniya Misabal. What would the Asay be? If the Misabal would allow her to go and marry anyone, then what? Tishtri Legami, she's fully mutter. Idoloyani Misabal. But if the Misabal does not help, then Tukma B'Milsa, Kamaisa, then she has the original laugh. Meaning, how would you be able to split the two and say that after the husband dies, there's an asay that forbids her from getting remarried? Says the Gemara, Alam Aloi. Why not? Apikta. Maybe the death comes and removes the lav and creates it, and there's now not safe for this woman to get remarried. Answers the Gemara, and what's this would be? This is the raya to the kasha. The kasha that the death would change from the lav to asay. We see from Psule Mikdashim that what an animal which is not able to be brought as a carbon demei kara originally is bu me'ilah. Such an animal, there's me'ilah, it belongs to the base of Mikdash, and you can't use it for mundane purposes, va'asiri, and it's forbidden begiz of avoid the sharings and the offsprings. The sharings, va'avoid and utilizing the animal to work. Parakinu, but what happens if you redeem that animal? Me'ilah lasts, there's no more me'ilah because it's redeemed, but begiz of avoid, asiri, it's also begiz of avoid. So asks the Gemara, maybe when a woman's husband dies, there's no longer a lava for her to marry the whole world, that she's no longer an Ishes Ish, but maybe there's still an Asay that she's not allowed to marry the whole world. Ella tries the Gemara again, Mid'amar Kra, for the fact that the Pasuk says, Ben Yamos b'milchama, and someone else will marry this person. We see that after the husband dies, another man is allowed to marry the woman. 8 lines from the bottom, Muscular of Shishi Brid Ravidi, 1 second. Ema, perhaps, man acher yavam. Maybe that's only referring to a case of yibam. Amar Ravashi, chei chuvas badavar. Chad adi yavam lo yikri, doesn't say anything about yavam. Acher, lo yavam lo yikri acher. The pasuk says, ish acher yikachanu. If we're talking about the yavam, we wouldn't call it ish acher. And secondly, void, ksevu sana ish acheroin. The pasuk says that if usana ish acheroin, v'kasla sever krisos, Oiki Amos Ish Achroin. Viskis Misa Le Gerushin. Ma Gerushin. Sharia Vigoimeres. Av Misa Sharia Vigoimeres. So number 1, the pasuk does not refer to the person as Yavam, rather Acher. And number 2, the pasuk says the Im Snei Ish Achroin, what happens or dies. So we see that Gerushin and Misa are put in together. Therefore, we know just like Gerushin can sever, so too Misa. And that's the final Makar. So the Makar that Misa allows a woman to marry the world, marry to anyone else, is from the pasuk of Sneish Achroin in juxtaposition to Vigirsha that we see just like Gerushin allows her to marry, so too Misa. We'll pick it up from the Dinam of Yivama the next year. B'siyata Dishmaya.